or good afternoon, our friends in Europe. It's Parshas Kisisa, and we're learning this morning in the schus of a refuah shlema for Rachel Bas Shalamis, and the Eibusha should grant that she and her husband should see kol mishalis levavchem levavam l'teiva v'levracha. Mazel tovs. We have a Mazel Tov Goldie Baumgarten's son, Chelek, was married to Batsheva Smoller last week, Tuesday. Mazel Tov Binyan Adead. And my son, Yisrael, and his wife, Chaya, the former Chaya Rivky, were blessed with a little girl. Her name is Gitzel Leah. And I don't think I got any other Mazel Tovs. So we'll go straight to the Sicha. It's Tisa Aleph in Chelek Chavav. Ala pasuk ze yitnu goimer b'tzivoy al machatzis hashekel. So on the verse, this is what you should give, and that verse contains the commandment to give a half shekel. Amru Chazal, and in the footnote we could see that it comes from the Yerushalmi. It's also brought down in the Tanchuma. Rashi also brings it down. Kimin matbeya shel eish haitzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem Haitzi took out a coin of fire, the Harehu LeMoshe, and showed it to Moshe Rabbeinu. Va'amar Loi, and Hashem told Moshe, Ze Yitnu, Kazeh Yitnu. This is what you should give. This is what it should look like that you should give. Ubebir hakoishi b'mitzvahs machatzis hashekel. Shemach masay hutzach Kadosh Baruch Hu laharos LeMoshe matbeya shel eish. So regarding, in the explanation, regarding what was so difficult about this mitzvah, that Hashem should take this extraordinary measure and have to show Moshe what the coin looks like in a coin of fire. Kasvu ha-taisvais, the taisvais, right, they explain, Tama Moshe al hadavar. Moshe wondered about this. Ma yuchal adam litain koifer nafshay. Because in the commandment, Hashem said that giving this half shekel is going to be an atonement for the soul of each person that gives it. And the Tosfos explains that Moshe wondered, how can a coin achieve atonement for a person's soul? But the Rebbe says on this explanation of Aladavar Derish Bir, but this requires explanation. So this explanation requires explanation. The Chima Hifli V'hitmia es Moshe Rabbeinu bekach shenesinas machatz hashekel yichol liyos koifer nafshay. What was so confounding? What was so confusing? Why was Moshe so bewildered that giving a half shekel can achieve atonement for the soul? Halei kol magid meisharim pashut. Let's skip the brackets for a moment. Masbir inyan zeh bepashtus gemura. Rebbe says, every simple magid, every traveling teacher can explain this. It's very simple. We'll go back to the brackets in a moment, but let's continue. Yehudi mekayem mitzvah, magia lo yischar al zeh. When a Jew does a mitzvah, they deserve a reward. Ulif amim zehu schar gadol b'yoser, and sometimes the reward is very, very great. For instance, like it says, if you go in my ways, I'm going to give you rains in the proper times, and all of the manifold blessings that are listed there. And it's the same thing with what we are dealing with right here. For doing the mitzvah of giving a half shekel, Hashem says, the Torah says, a Jew is going to get atonement for his soul. Now that we've just, gone through this and explained the Rebbe's thought, let's go back to the brackets, where the Rebbe wants to underscore the difference between a simple magid, in other words, a pedestrian teacher of Torah, and Moshe Rabbeinu. So he says that every simple magid, wow, learning together, so cute. Every simple magid can understand that the Abisha gives a mitzvah and gives a reward, and sometimes the reward seems to totally eclipse the importance of the mitzvah. So why was Moshe so bewildered? And in the brackets, the Rebbe says about Moshe, "Shesichloi sheloi be'erech klal uklal lesichloi shel Moshe Rabbeinu," that the cognition, that the cognitive abilities of a maggid, of a regular teacher, of a traveling preacher or sermonizer, it cannot be compared to the cognitive abilities of Moshe Rabbeinu, about whom the Rambam wrote, "Hanifchor mikol min ha'adam," who was chosen from the entire from all of humanity, asher hestig yoser chulei, that was able to grasp cognitively much more than anyone else, utachlis hashlemis b'seichel, and he represents the consummate cognitive abilities for a human being. So basically, in short, how could Moshe be so bewildered by this if a simple person could understand, a simple teacher could understand that this is the reward that the Eibush is giving for this mitzvah? And yes, sometimes the reward does not seem to be commensurate with the mitzvah. Sometimes it seems to be completely over the top relative to the mitzvah, but it happens. The imkain, and if so, mahu apella, pella gadol de Moshe Rabbeinu. So if this is so, why such wonder on the part of Moshe Rabbeinu? Shal yidei kiyum mitzvah zu noisnim milmaila es haschar de koifer nafshay. That for fulfilling the mitzvah of machatz hashekel, the Eibush is going to give what kind of reward? Atonement for the soul. Gam ena muvan. So our first question is, why is Moshe so bent out of shape? And the second is, in which way is Hashem showing him a golden coin, a reply to his question? Aleph. And now to drill down, Mahu hadiyuk matbeya shel eish dafka. And why specifically are we taught that what was shown to Moshe was a coin of fire specifically? And the Rebbe says, either way, it's interesting that the idea that it was from fire is underscored. Im hadiyuk de eish umitzadzeh shekol inyanun del mailahim eish mishorsav eish lo yehitikayetz. If you want to go at this from the perspective that everything in the celestial realm is a fire, as it says in Tehillim, his servants are flaming fire. And therefore, when Hashem shows something, any form of something, it's going to be comprised or made of fire. Then it's not necessary to underscore it specifically here. Because everything above is made of fire. So from that perspective, why would it have to say matbeya shalish? The im nemar, and if you approach this from the opposite perspective, and if you say shalulei hadgasha matbeya shalish hava amina shekash baruch her leMoshe matbeya pshuta, that if it wouldn't have said matbeya shalish, if the Gemara in Yerushalmi and the Medrash, and then Rashi brings it down, wouldn't have said that the coin was made out of fire, we would think that Hashem showed him a regular coin, matbeya shel kesef v'lo shalish, a coin made of silver, not of fire. And then there's even a precedent for this. Al derech, the Rebbe says, like for instance, Hakein Moisa Hamishkan Kimishpata Yasher Hemesa Bahar. Hashem says you should erect the Mishkan in accordance with the instructions that I gave you and I showed you on the mountain. Sheher Ewa Kadosh Baruch Hu Tavne Shel Mishkan Gashmi. That Hashem showed Moshe the form and the image of a Mishkan made out of material, Al pi pshutishal mikra. And this is considered pshutishal mikra, simple pshat. And it wasn't made out of fire. So then if we're going from that perspective, Darish bir leidach, then we have to understand, on the other hand, Ma nishtana machatzis hashekel shahaya hechrach la'araise matbeya shalish dafka. So why is the machatzis hashekel different that the Eibusher would have to show it out of fire? In other words, if we go from the perspective that everything in heaven is comprised of fire, then why does it have to be underscored here that the matbeya is made out of fire? And if we're going to say that the Eibusher shows images, forms of things, the way that they appear in material form in this world, then why is the matbeya, the machatzis hashekel, different, and that appears in fire? Beis ve'ikar. But the main thing we want to understand is Heichan hu hamayna al tmiyasa shel Moshe Rabbeinu keitzad yechola nesinas machatzis hashekel liyos kofer nafshay b'zeh sheher'eu HaKadosh Baruch Hu matbeya shel eish. Where is the answer to Moshe's question? And Moshe's question is, how can a coin, the giving of a coin, precipitate atonement for the soul? How is that answered? By Hashem showing him a coin made out of fire. That's Seif Aleph. So we begin with asking why Hashem has to show the coin of fire in the first place. Tosfos explains because Moshe Rabbeinu was bewildered as to how this kind of mitzvah should be able to achieve something so great. But the Rebbe says, how is this an answer? How is Hashem showing him a coin made out of fire an answer to his essential question? And also, why such an emphasis on the fire of the coin? We could go with two approaches. One is that everything in the celestial realm is made of fire. So then what's the big deal here? Or no, the Eibusher, for instance, showed the Mishkan in a material sense to Moshe Rabbeinu, some kind of vision, some kind of mirage, but it wasn't made of fire. So then it brings us back to our question, why here emphasis on fire? Seif Beis. L'ch'ayra hayefshar loymar. Shebeis ha'she'elos hanal b'mayna kadosh baruch hu mituratzes achas bechavrta. It would seem that we could say that both of these questions answer each other. Okay, so there's intersectionality here. Hamayna al tmiyasa shel Moshe, keitzad yechayla nesinas machatzis hashekel liyos kofer nafshehu. What's the answer to Moshe's wonder as to how giving a half shekel can achieve atonement for the soul? What's the answer? Her'eu HaKadosh Baruch Hu matbeya shel eish. Hashem showed him a coin made out of fire, which means Gisha Yehudi Mekayim mitzvah. When a Jew observes a mitzvah about which Yirmiyahu says, Koi dvarai ke'esh, is not my words like fire? Yirmiyahu channeling Hashem, are not my words like fire? So when a Jew is Mekayim a mitzvah, al yidei matbeya gashmis, through a physical coin, and how much more so when a Jew fulfills this mitzvah with passion and enthusiasm, the eish shebinafshay, the fire that is in his soul, nasis hamatbeya inishalesh, then the physical coin becomes fire. V'lachein yesh b'koyach nesina zu liyos kofer nafshay, and therefore this can actually affect atonement for his soul. Okay, that could be an answer. And that answer is both things. The emphasis on the fire, which is a metaphor for passion. And when you do this mitzvah with passion and enthusiasm and the fire in your soul, yes, it can offer you atonement for your soul. But if you give this answer, you're only begging another question. You're only strengthening the original question. Ma What was Moshe's? Why was he so baffled to begin with? This explanation that the Rebbe said one could possibly offer, that when you do a mitzvah, what could happen is that you turn that physical coin into fire, who aleph drash rogil shall kol darshan. First of all, it's an explanation that every teacher can offer. It's not rocket science. It's something that is well known. And Bays, it's been a gala kol mitzvahs. This is true of all mitzvahs. So it's not specific to Machatz HaShekel. It's true of all mitzvahs. Shal yedei kiyum mitzvah mamshichim upoilim bidvar hamitzvah inishal eish ruchanis. That through doing a mitzvah, you bring down, you elicit through the mitzvah fire, spiritual fire. So we're back to our original question. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu, you could see the Rebbe underscores Moshe Rabbeinu, the person who had the highest level of understanding, what is he so confused about? And why is it about this mitzvah specifically, Machatz HaShekel? Zois va'od. And even more. Mishum ha. If that was the reason, if the whole thing is that when you do something, when you do a mitzvah, especially if you do it with enthusiasm, you bring down a spiritual fire, and this can give you atonement for your soul, Hashem could have just explained this to Moshe. V'adrabah, and even more so, hadavar hayatzarech liyaz dafke v'rak al yedei dibor. And seemingly, it should have been specifically through speech and only through speech that this message is imparted. Because Hashem gave all of the mitzvahs, the entire Torah to Moshe, through speech. Umadua hutzach Kadosh Baruch Hu kan lahaitzi or laharis l'Moshe matbei shel eish v'loy mazeh yitnu. So why was it necessary for Hashem in this case to show Moshe a coin made of fire and say, this is what I want you to give? V'keivan shebe'inyan zeh dafka nidrasha pa'ula miyuchedes shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu laharis matbei shel eish v'loy mazeh yitnu. And because the Torah teaches that it was specifically regarding this concept, that this very anomalous action was necessary, in addition to Hashem following up and saying, this is what you should give. Al karchach tzarech leimar. So basically, you're compelled to say, you're forced to say, sheb'machatz HaShekel yeshna inyan miyuchad sheloi matzinu b'shar kol hamitzvos. That regarding this mitzvah, Machatz HaShekel, there is something very specific that is not found by all other mitzvahs. Gimel. Nikudas habir bazeh yesh leimar. So the central or core concept here, we might say, this is the Rebbe's signature humility, yesh leimar. Whenever he rolls out a novelty, he says, we might say, generally speaking, reward for mitzvah can come in one of two iterations. Either aleph asiyas hamitzvah hi pu'ula asher mitzatoichin inyana mevia hi schar pleni. Either that the mitzvah itself, because of the content of the mitzvah, brings a certain reward in its wake. Haschar hu mesuvav mipu'ulas hamitzvah. The schar, the reward, is a result. It's a consequence of the mitzvah itself. Okay, that's one way that schar comes. Bays, or another way is Teichen pu'ulas hamitzvah ein shayach al pi seichel al kol panim l'schar pleni. The content of the mitzvah has absolutely no logical, at least logical, connection to the reward that Hashem gives. But this is what Hashem decided. To give this particular reward for this particular mitzvah. So, like exhibit A would be that you're blessed with long life for shooing away the mother bird before you take the small birds or the eggs. Okay, it seems like a rather simple thing to do to get such a great reward, especially because the other thing that you're rewarded long life for is something that takes a lifetime, and still most people don't do it perfectly, and that is to honor our parents. Okay, so the Rebbe says sometimes that happens. Just like generally speaking, when it comes to mitzvahs, there are mitzvahs that have no logical underpinning. But rather, the only reason we have to do these mitzvahs is because that is an edict that God divined, and that is a statute that God established. And the Rebbe says, Hein hu gam le'inyan schar mitzvahs. And it's the same thing with schar. She'efshar, she'al mitzvahs misuyemes, gam ela shebesug de mishpatim, yinasein schar gadol be'erach ha-mitzvah, ki kein hu ritzaynoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu chuka chakakti. Just like there are mitzvahs that we can't understand logically, so too there is schar for mitzvahs, there is reward for mitzvahs that the Eibusha gives for certain mitzvahs. They can even be mishpatim, which are the logical mitzvahs. And Hashem gives a reward that is completely not commensurate with the action, but that is Hashem's desire. That is Hashem's will. And so it is with what we're studying. The reward that you get atonement for your soul for giving a half shekel. Me'achar shemachas hashekel matbei gashmis v'koifer nafshoi ruchnius einam be'erach zelazeh ad shehem hafchim min hakatza lakatza. So now the Rebbe is going to underscore just how logically unlikely it is that for giving a half shekel, we should achieve atonement for the soul. And the Rebbe is going to go into some detail here in the brackets. Kishem shale inin tachlis brias ha'adam l'shamesh es kainoi hine hamamoin kesev zav hu bein hadvarim agashmim gufa davar tachton biyoser. The Rebbe says that in the large view of why we're in this world, we were created to serve our master. We were created to serve Hashem. So within that larger landscape, money, silver, gold, from amongst all material, physical things, this is something lowly in the extreme. And like we see in concrete fashion, in practical fashion, that the desire, that the lust for money can bring a person down to the lowest depth. Ad she'amru dekim lahu l'rabanan de'ein adam maimed atzmai al memainai. So much so that the Chachamim say that a person cannot restrain themselves when they might lose their money. They can't restrain themselves from doing certain things in the face of a tremendous monetary loss. And this is in the context of Hilchos Shabbos. And what a person might not be able to hold themselves back from doing for money. And all Torah Chachamim teach, Adam bahul al mamoinai. A person gets very exercised and agitated about money. We don't need to underscore. Everybody knows. V'yesh loymar, the Rebbe says, we might say, shedavar zeh ba lidei bitui gam b'mkoimam shel hakesef v'hazav kipshutain. And one of the things the Chassidus teaches all the time is that every physical fact is a pale reflection of a celestial reality. So the Rebbe says that money can bring you to very low places. And in the physical realm, this is expressed by where you mine silver and gold from. It's besug hadoimim gufa mikoimam berubam hubimamake hadamadavka. Within the inanimate realm of the world, it's in the depth of the earth from which you mine gold and silver. Berubam, the Rebbe says, in the aggregate, usually. Tachton she'ein tachton lamata mimeno. It's the lowest of the lowest strata. And after you mine it and you have to, put a lot of effort into it, still nidrash gam mitzaref lekesev vekor lezav. And after that, you still need a crucible for the silver. You need a furnace for the gold to refine the metals and to take away the dross from what is actually valuable, and so on and so forth. So that's money. Money is the lowest of the low. Uleidach, on the other hand, hare koifer nafshoy. And now you're talking about atonement of the soul. Kol nefesh, every soul, hidavar achi nala, is the highest thing that could be. Valachas kama v'kama nafshoy shel ish yisrael sheichelek el kami mal mamash. And how much more so in this mitzvah we're talking about atonement for a Jewish soul, and a Jewish soul is a veritable aspect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, actually an aspect of Hashem. Hari ein mokoim al pisechal shepaulas nesinas mamen gashmi tachlis hayirida tifal mitzat toichen inyana as inyan koifer nafshay dechelik al kami mal mamish tachlis ha'ilui. So there is no way, no how. There is no place in seichel. There's no place in logic, in cognition, to understand how money, which is the nadir of all matter, should be able to effectuate atonement for the soul, specifically of a soul that is part of Hashem. And although it's true that because it's a mitzvah, like every other mitzvah, it results in a spiritual fire. That's true. But the Rebbe says, but that larger concept, that when a Jew does a mitzvah, and especially if they do it with passion and with enthusiasm, that there is a fire that results from it, that's not connected specifically to the physical coin itself. Because the fire results from the mitzvah, from the spiritual aspects. And the physical coin or any other physical matter that you use for a mitzvah remains in its physical form. ונמצא שפעולת המצווה גופה הנסינה דמטבע גשמיס אינה בערך כלל מצד עניינה, אלא היכולת לפעול כופר נפשי. So again, the Rebbe says, it seems, that the actual act of the mitzvah, the giving of the physical coin, doesn't correlate at all with this great result of atonement for the soul. Dalit. And this allows us to understand the content of Moshe Rabbeinu's wonder and doubt. Mitzad sichloi shel Moshe, sechel de Torah, because from the perspective of Moshe's mind, which is the sechel of Torah, nimtza, shahaschar de koifer nafshay al hanesina de machas hashekel ubegeder chuka. Because from the perspective of Torah, from the perspective of Moshe, the fact that this should be the schar for giving a half shekel, this is a chayk. This is a trans-rational or supra-rational concept. Al pi seichel zehu davar tamua. Because if you go with actual regular seichel, pedestrian seichel, it's a wonder. V'yesh makom lahirur, and there is place to wonder. There is place to ask. This does not seem calibrated. Elo shekevan shezeu ritzani shel Kadosh Baruch Hu chuka chakakti, harei ein lecha rishus laharba. But since the Eibishter said this is the way it is, so Hashem established a statue, that's what it is, so then you have no permission to wonder about it. But in this case, on the other hand, meaning in this particular case, nevertheless, but because the Eibishter did not describe or refer to this mitzvah machas hashekel as a chayk, the Eibishter does not refer to it as a chayk. Barur, it's clear, sheyesh has bar bedavar, that there has to be an explanation. Ulefichach, and therefore, tama Moshe ma yuchal adam litin kofer nafshay. So Moshe wondered, what can a person give that could possibly precipitate atonement for a soul? Ech yitachein biur vehesber al piseichel lekach shenesinas matbea gashmis machzah shekel hi pa'ula sheyesh biyecholta lifol kofer nafshay. Where and how is there a logical explanation for this dynamic, that giving a physical coin can affect atonement for the soul? And so because Moshe, from his perspective of Moshe's seichel, from the perspective of Torah's seichel, within the rubric of Torah, Moshe wondered, what did Hashem reply? Harehu matbeya shel eish v'amar lo zeyitnu. Hashem showed him a coin made of fire, and he said, this is what you should give. HaKadosh Baruch Hu harehu shekasher Yisrael noisnim machetz hashekel hoifeches hamatbeya atzma lo rak mitzat haruchnis hamitzvah sheba lematbeya shel eish. Hashem showed him that when Jews give a machetz hashekel, the coin itself, not just the spiritual component of the mitzvah, right? Because Chassidus teaches that every mitzvah has a body and a soul. But the Rebbe is saying here, not just that the soul is fire, but that the body, the coin itself, becomes fire. It is transformed into matbeya shalesh, becomes a coin of fire. And once we understand that, then we can understand the connection between the content of giving the machzah shekel and the reward of atonement for the soul. How so? So, before the Rebbe explains this, he wants to draw a distinction between this mitzvah machzah shekel and tzedakah. Because again, the question is, why was Moshe in such a state of wonder, bewilderment? Why was Moshe so confounded by this? So Rebbe wants to explain that we're talking about machzah shekel. We're not talking about staka in the general sense. Look in the brackets. Masha enki bit staka. We're talking about machzah shekel in contradistinction to staka. Harei ein zu pa'ulas hamatbeya klal, ela kemaimer razal, shu gam svar pshuta, ata hecheyese es nefesh ha'ani b'nei beisai. When you give tzedakah, it's not about the denominations, the coins, the dollars. And this is also simply, we understand that you literally are giving vitality to the soul of the poor person and the members of their household. And therefore, tzedakah offers such a great reward that, tzedakah tatzil mimaves, tzedakah saves from death, and so on and so forth. But that's mida connected mida, that's measure for measure. There's a correlation there. There's a symmetry there. We understand. You save someone's life, your life is saved. But what are we talking about here? From the half shekel, they made the adanim, they made the silver basis into which the krushim, the beams of the Mishkan were inserted. Vimkein, ma yuchal, ech yochal eze davar shia afilu hadanim liyetz kaifel lenefesh. So, how is this possible? Tzedakah? Okay, I understand why the reward should be that there's atonement for your soul. But a half shekel that went to the adanim, what's the correlation? Hey, v'habir bazeh. An explanation is as follows. V'zeh gufa, she'har'eu HaKadosh Baruch Hu matbeya shel eish v'amar zeh yitnu. Pa'al HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'yatzar davar chidush. Pa'al v'yatzar, both italicized, both underscored. Through this action of showing the matbeya shel eish, the coin of fire, and saying this is what you should give, Hashem effected, Hashem created something novel. Elza's saying the sockets that went to the ground where the silver came from. Yeah, thank you. Hashem created something new. Machatzitz hashekel shenitnu b'nei Yisrael ba'es hashah ba'adavar nimshach b'mitzvahs machatz hashekel tamid kol hayamim loy haisa rak matbeya gashmis elagam matbeya shel eish. The Rebbe explains that the Eibishter created a new concept, a new paradigm, that the machatz hashekel, that the Jews would give at that time in history, and this continued throughout history. The Rebbe says, Tamid kol hayamim, constantly, till today, that this is not just a physical matbeya. Rather, it's a matbeya shel eish. It's a coin of fire. Kilimar, that is to say, al yedei zeh nischadesh, shematbeya zu shehera kadosh baruch hu l'Moshe. What was novel is that this matbeya that Hashem showed Moshe, hamatbeya kefi shehi b'sharsha eish tachas kisei hakavod, the matbeya the way it is in its spiritual source, from a fire that is beneath Hashem's throne. Hine zeh yitnu b'nei Yisrael matbeya kizu mamash. This is what Bnei Yisrael would give, a matbeya like this, mamash. V'hainu, this means, shenais av lezeh shal yidei mitzvah mamshichim epoyalim b'matbeya in shel eish. This means that in addition to the fact that through this mitzvah you draw down and you effectuate fire, shekeinu b'chol mitzvahs kanal, and as we said above, this is true of every mitzvah. Yesh b'machatz hashekel chidush miyuchad. There is a novel thing regarding the machatz hashekel. Shahamatbeya atzma hi matbeya shel eish. That the coin itself, okay? So it's not that there's a spiritual result, which is a fire, a spiritual fire that comes into this world. No, the coin itself becomes a coin of fire. The novelty is not that in its spiritual source it emerges from a coin of fire. Because that is true of all physical things. All physical matter devolves from its spiritual antecedent, from its spiritual source. In all other cases, the spiritual source remains above, and the physical matter remains physical because it's in a physical, material, corporeal world. But the Rebbe says this is not what we're talking about here. But rather, Ella, Bikach, but rather it's that Shagam la'achar shematbeya zu nishtal shela v'yorda la'olam hazeh gashmi, that after this coin devolves and comes down into this physical world, hine al yedei shemekaimim b'mitzvahs machetz hashekel nifal shinui b'matbeya. After you fulfill this mitzvah with it, there is effected a change in this coin. And in its physical form, it becomes a coin of fire. Vav. And through this, we're in a position to understand the specific novelty of Machatz HaShekel. Asher darash pu'ula miyuchedes shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu matbeya shel eish hoiti va'amar zeh yitnu lagabe shar kol hamitzvahs. Now we're in a position to understand why this mitzvah necessitated a unique action on the part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he took out a coin of fire and he said, this is what you should give, vis-a-vis all other mitzvahs. Ma shematzinu b'chol ha-mitzvah sham-mitzvah mamshicha chayus ruchanis eish b'asiyah gashmis. Harei ze ba'ofen shagashmi atzmai nimtza v'nishar lemata mimkorei. That which we said above, that we find by every mitzvah, that every mitzvah draws down a spiritual fire in and with the physical action, but that happens in a way where whatever physical matter you're working with remains physical, and it remains lower than its source. Lamata mimkare meharuchani. Remains in this world in physical sense below its spiritual source. Ela shebetoich hagashmi mamshicha mitzvah chayus ruchanis. Shezeu inin ishtalshelo shebetoich hatachton yeshnoi ulefamim gam meir min ha'elyon. But rather what happens is that into the physical is drawn down and inserted a spiritual vitality. And this is, again, an inyan of ishtalshalos, an inyan of devolution, that within the lower realm there should be, and sometimes it even illuminates something of the supernal realm. But always and forever, the physical remains lower than the spiritual. There's a elyon, there's a supernal realm, and there's the tachton, there's the lower realm, the physical realm. But now the Rebbe is going to roll out the Chiddush Machatz HaShekel. Masha Ein Kain, in contradistinction, but Machatz HaShekel, Chiddush Hu, what's the novelty in the Indian of Machatz HaShekel? Shehamadbeya Hagashmis, Sheyisrael Noisnim, that the physical coin that the Jew gives, he atzma nasis madbeya shel eish chibor deshnei hafchim. The physical coin becomes a coin of fire, which is a union, a fusion of two dichotomous things. Sheriafilu yisoida eish hagashmi da'olam hazeh hu bekatze hahefchi de matbeya. The Rebbe says, because even in terms of the physical elements of this world, which are, to remind ourselves, earth, water, fire, and wind. So even in those four elements, the element of fire in this world is on the other side of the spectrum from a coin, because matbeya he ofar, because a coin comes from the earth. Uba afar gufa, and within earth, within that element, the mamake hadama canal. It comes from the from deep within the earth, as stated above. So afar is hayisoid hachin namuch. Earth is the element that is lowest in the hierarchy, and fire is the one that is the highest. Ve'esh hi hayisoid hachi gavoya v'nala. It's the highest and the most exalted. Now the Rebbe is going to drill down to this. And how much more so this is true in what the elements kind of reflect from their spiritual antecedents. Kiyadua, as is known, shadalid hayisoides eish ruach mayim afar him keneged dalid olamais abya. It's well known, Hasidus teaches, that the four elements parallel the four worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. So Afar is Keneged Olam Hasiya, Ha'olam Hachi Tachton. Earth parallels the world of Asiya, which is the lowest world. Ve'esh Keneged Olam Hatzilus. And fire parallels Atzilus, Ha'olam Hachi Elyon. So now that the Rebbe has underscored how dichotomous these elements are, the chibor shnei hafchim elu matbeya gashmis matbeya shel eish ubefrat she'ein zu ha'eish she'ba'olam hazeh gashmi kim zeh eish tachas kisei kavod hu hefach kol inyan seder shtalshlos. So the fusion of matbeya and eish, coin and fire, is totally opposite the whole system, not only of this physical world, but of all spiritual spheres and all spiritual paradigms. Especially, the Rebbe says, you're not talking about physical fire, which physical fire in and of itself is on the opposite side of the spectrum of a physical coin. But the Rebbe says you're talking about Zeh. What did Hashem, Zeh, this, what did Hashem show him? Fire that came from beneath the throne of glory. So this is the opposite of ishtalshelus. Shekein ishtalshelus perush kanal shahatachtain mishtalshel mina elyon umemela hulamata mimena. The Rebbe reminds us, because what is the definition of ishtalshelus? That something devolves from something else, that from a higher source something comes into the lower realm, and then from that something goes lower yet. And so there's an order, there's a hierarchy. That which devolves is always going to be lower than its source. But here we have movement in the opposite direction, opposing gravity, as it were. The yeser al kain, and even more. Zeu afilu hefach haseder al pitayra. And this is also opposite the hierarchy that we find in Torah. Shalamayla min ha'olam. And Torah is a paradigm that exists higher than this world. In other words, it doesn't have to conform to the rubrics and the metrics and the limitations of the laws of nature. But even in Torah, it's opposite of how things happen in Torah. Why? Because in Torah you also have this system of devolution, of hishtalshalos, of incremental devolving of one thing from another. Shechelek hapshat shekeneged olam hasiya. So you see what the Rebbe has done here, right? In holographic fashion. He starts with the four elements. He correlates them with the four worlds. Now he's going to correlate them with the four ways of learning Torah, pardes, pshat, remez, drash, and soit. So he says that chelek hapshat shekeneged olam hasiya, that the way of learning Torah according to pshat, the simple explanation, which parallels olam hasiya, which parallels afar in the four elements, mishtalshel begimel shlavim michelek hasoid. So in the hishtalshel shebetayra, pshat comes down through three phases or three chain-like reactions from Atzilus, from Said to pshat. And Said is connected Olam Hatzilus. Umemela, and therefore Hulamata Himenu, Ubeharbe. And so pshat is always going to be lower than Said. And the Rebbe says, Ubeharbe, by a long shot, it's going to be lower. This is why Moshe was so bewildered. V'lachein ein chibor zeh d'matbeya im eish yachal liyos al yidei malach ulei. And that's why an angel could never effectuate this fusion between afar and eish, between matbeya and eish. Even the Torah can't effectuate this. Shekulam heim ba'ofen shel ishtalshalos. Umemela mugbalim begeder ha'ishtalshalos. Because Malach, Torah, all of this still has to conform to the limitations and the metrics and the rubric and the systems and the processes and whatever you want to say of ishtalshalos. There's a way in which these things happen, and they always devolve from something higher to something lower. This could only happen by Hashem himself. Hashem chose this with his will, with his desire, and never can God be forced, God forbid. The Eibush is able to do it. He chose with his will to do this in Ishtalshalos, even though this doesn't conform at all to Ishtalshalos. But the Eibush is a Kol Yachol. Hashem could do anything. And the Eibush is Nimna Hanim No'is. Nothing is impossible for Hashem. And therefore, Hare Biyacholta Levatel Eseder Ishtalshalos. Hashem can completely subvert, can completely obviate the normal Seder Shtalshalos, the normal system of devolution, Ulechaber as beis hofchim, the Gashmias v'ruchnias, and to fuse these two dichotomous things, the physical, the material, and the spiritual, Shahamadbeya Hagashmis, that the physical coin, Tia Bipoyel, Ba'olam Hazeh, Gam Matbeya Shel Eish. That it should be a physical coin, and it should be a coin of fire. Not one or the other, Gam, both. Zion.
Sorry to interrupt. I feel like I'm missing an essential link, so I just want to quickly ask a question. It seems like I don't know what I'm missing, but why is this so different than anything else in the world, that Hashem gave the capacity that Gashmias can become Ruchni once it's used for a mitzvah? Obviously, only Hashem has that capacity, but once with the giving of the Torah, that Hashem bridged that and broke that barrier. Do you understand my question?
So at the end, the Rebbe is going to say, Mamish at the end in the Hira, the Rebbe is going to say, and from this we learn the same for all the mitzvahs.
So this was the first instance of it, and that's why Moshe was confounded?
So that's what it seems like. That's what it seems like. But also, I mean, I have to confess that I'm struggling with this. Okay, I think I understand. I mean, to the extent that I can understand what the Rebbe is saying, but it was still a physical coin. It wasn't a coin that if you touched it, your fingers got burnt. And yet, it was completely different from every other mitzvah in this way that it became fire.
Had the same question, like what happened to that matbeya? It didn't become fire. Like right when you were saying that, I was thinking the exact same thing.
Yeah. No, it's not talking about the matbeya that David just showed. It's that our matbeyas. I mean, one thing I do know, that I have a completely new appreciation for this, for the Indian of the Chatzi shekel. You know, I have to tell you, I like always see the way this is done with great reverence around me, but I never really like, I have to confess, like got it. Like, what's the big deal? Like with such tchilu v'richmo, like with such fervor and such like to do this mitzvah. But so here the Rebbe is explaining like a whole, there's it's something out of this world, literally.
But look at a coin from the Rebbe. Is the dime the same dime? Would you take it into the bathroom? It's a dime. It's just a nickel, seemingly. But what happens to that? To that coin, that dollar? There's a kedusha in it that's what it means. There's a certain kedusha in it that it elevates it to a whole different level. And what's going to happen if someone does take it in the bathroom? Nobody's going to know the difference, right? But how can you?
Yeah, Esther. Thank you for that. That's for concretizing it for us. Thank you so much for that. Okay, we have to go. Some of us have time constraints. I'm sorry about that. And Elsa saying, the Rebbe is going to go back to the thing of it not being a chayk, Elsa. Zayin. V'zeu ha'mayna shel Kadosh Baruch Hu b'medrash. And this is the answer of Hashem in the medrash, Matbeya shel eish hoitzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'amar loy ze yitnu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu daika v'al yidei amira. So Rebbe says, now we're going to drill down on two other specificities in the medrash. One, that Hashem took it out, which the Rebbe has already addressed, and only Hashem could have done this. And Hashem said, this is what you should give. Hahis achdus de gashmias beruchnias, shematbeya gashmias tia gam matbeya shel eish. The fusion of material and spiritual, that the physical coin should become a coin of fire. Shnehem bepoel bevas achas. Both of them at the same time. Kesef v'koifer nafshay. It's both made out of silver, it looks like a regular coin, and it's also an atonement for the soul. And this can only be done by God. Hashem both chose Seder Shalshalos. Hashem chose a certain system for how things would occur, and therefore, simply Hashem can completely transcend and override this same system that Hashem created. Va'al derech inin habriya yesh me'ayin. And this is in line with creation, all of creation, which is something from nothing. Sheyachal liyos rak, that creation, as Chassidus explains, can only happen me'atzmusoi u'mehusoi shel hamatzil baruch hu shemitziusoi me'atzmusoi ve'enoi olul me'eze ilo shekadma lo chas v'shalom. Okay, that's a mouthful, and these are very basic ideas in Chassidus. So let me start with the two words olul and ila. Olul means an effect, and ila means a cause. Okay, so Chassidus explains that yesh me'ayin can only happen from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Me'atzmusoi u'mehusoi. What is HaKadosh Baruch Hu? His existence is from his own being. He is not something that came, chas v'chalila, from some preceding factor. And this comes down to the only way to really define Elokus, to define God, as that which is not contingent on anything else. The only thing that is not contingent on anything else. And because Hashem is in existence from his own being, from his own existence, and is not a effect from any previous, not a cause, not an effect from any previous cause that precedes him. V'lachein, and therefore, hu levadoi b'koicha v'yecholtoi livra yesh me'ayin. And therefore, he alone is able to create something from nothing. Ukeshem shebe'inin yesh me'ayin. And just like it is with creation writ large, that the world was created through 10 fiats, through 10 utterances, as it says in Tehillim, the heavens were created through the words of God. Kain hugam le'inyan hisavozu shematbea gashmis te'egam shel esh asher davar ze nifal al yidei dibur shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it is with this particular creation that Hashem created something new, that a physical coin should be able to also be a coin of fire. Dibur HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this utterance of God, Ze Yitnu, this is what you should give. These words, Shamatbeya Hagashmish Noisnim Yisrael Yitnu Tia Gam Eish Ze. These words that Hashem said, Ze Yitnu, this you should give. That this physical, material coin that Bnei Yisrael give will be a fire. Pa'al es hahishavus dechidus Ze. This created the existence of this novelty. Bidugmas his avos hanivraim b'sheshis me'breshis aydei dibur mamar shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is in the same model. This aligns with how Hashem created the world in the first place through His words. In Seif Ches, the Rebbe pushes back at himself. He says, "L'chayr efshar lishal al kach." Seemingly, you can ask. Bivada yoda Moshe Rabbeinu gam lefnei shehera lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu matbeya shel eish shebiyecholto yizbarech lechaber shnei hafchim. What? This is a newsflash to Moshe Rabbeinu that Hashem is capable of fusing two opposing principles. And from this would flow his understanding that Hashem is completely capable of fusing the physical coin with its spiritual source. So now the original question reasserts itself. So now we're still left wondering, what was Moshe's great wonder? What was Moshe so confounded by? Ma yachal adam litinkai for nafshay. What can a person possibly give that will be atonement for his soul? The kama tshuvas b'davar. The Rebbe says there are a number of replies, umehen, and from among the ways of answering this question are the following. Aleph, bechachma v'sechel tikedusha, in cognition and wisdom of holiness, meaning the level of Moshe, sarich davar kazel liyos tamua. It has to be a wonder. Ella shaliyosei chuka ein hu maharer. But if you're going to say that it's a chayik, then you can't ask. But it should be something that you would wonder about. But then you wouldn't be able to say that it's a mishpat or a edus. Now the problem with this is, Beis, ma'achar shakadosh baruch hu lo higdir as mitzvahs machatz shekel b'tor chuka, but because, Elza, Hashem did not describe the mitzvah of machatz shekel as a chayk, as a trans-rational statute, borur sheyesh hasbara al tmiyasai. So then it's clear that there has to be an explanation about which Moshe wondered. Borur v'hamitzvah de machatz shekel hi bechlal ha'ishtalshlus de Torah mitzvahs, and then that would mean that machatz shekel does conform to the regular system of ishtalshlus. V'yeser al kain, v'zeh gufa eina b'sug dechuka. And even more so, in the normal rubrics of Torah, this is not a chayk. V'zehu gam hadiuk b'loshen hatshuva b'medrash kimim matbeya shel eish her'ehu l'Moshe. And this now points us to the specificity of another word in the answer in the Medrash, which is that Hashem showed a coin of fire to Moshe. Kidei lahasir es tmias Moshe lo dai b'amir se'inyan l'Moshe. In order to address Moshe's deep wonder or even consternation or exasperation, like he's unable to understand. So to address this, it wasn't enough for Hashem to say something to him. Ki az nishar hadavar begeder tmiya she'efshar lavina b'seichel, because then it still remains a wonder. Just by saying something to him, he would still not be able to understand it cognitively. It wouldn't be enough to take away his question. Elatzarech liyos her'eu. Hashem had to show it to him. Shahapa'ula, sheba hamatbea gashmis nasis gam hamatbea shel eish. Tia ba'ofen shel re'iyah. This which Hashem created out of network, so to speak, right? Completely out of hishtalshalos, that there is a physical coin that becomes also a coin of fire, had to be tia ba'ofen shel re'iyah. It had to be something that Moshe saw. Hainu begilui mamash. It had to be completely revealed. Ba'ofen dezeh yitnu mara be'etzba'oi va'omer zeh. It had to be something that Hashem could actually point to and say this. And this is reminiscent of the famous sikh of the Rebbe on the idea that by Matan Torah, the Jews saw that which is normally heard. And the Rebbe explains the difference between sight and hearing. And the Rebbe explains that when you hear something, it's more removed. It remains more abstract and abstruse. When you see something, it concretizes it, and it affects you in a way where it takes away questions. It's like, it's a fact. You saw it. The yeser al kain, and even more so, hagilui eina rak leMoshe, elahu lechol Yisrael. And here the Rebbe adds a whole different thing, that this revelation wasn't only to Moshe, it was to all of Bnei Yisrael. Shenesinasam hi ba'ofen dezeh yitnu. That when they gave the coin, it will be in the same modality of this is what you're going to give, a fiery coin. Hainu shebimatbeya shehem noisnim nikar begilui gam shehi b'fchina zeh matbeya shel eish. That when Bnei Yisrael give the matbeya, it's going to be revealed and recognized by them that they are giving a coin of fire. So it's lahavchin heitiv al yidei zeh lahidia liyisrael. Hashem made sure that Moshe should understand it well, and through that he should be able to teach it to the rest of Bnei Yisrael. Tess. Now the Rebbe is going to add a whole new strata. V'yesh lahosiv bir b'teichna in d'matbeya shel eish daika. Now the Rebbe says, and we might add, in explaining the content of this whole idea, and that it was specifically through fire. Why? Because kedei lahadgish hamatbeya shenoisim Yisrael hi lo yirak matbeya gashmis ela gam matbeya shelamayla shemitachas kisei hakavod. Because in order to underscore that the coin that Bnei Yisrael are going to give is not just a physical coin, but it's also a celestial coin that actually comes from beneath Hashem's throne. Ein hechrech lahares matbeya shel eish dafka. There was nothing that compelled it to be specifically fire. Because we find that above, there's also water. There are other elements. For For instance, we're taught that Michael is the deputy of water, the chule. Umadua her ehu matbea shel eish dafka. So why did this coin have to be a fire? V'yesh loymar, and we might say shekvar herab al yedei zeh pola kadosh baruch hu shahanesina demachas hashekel tia loyrak inyan ruchani ella beruchni es gufa inyan shel eish. We might say that the Eibishter showed, and through showing it, he effectuated that the giving of machatzes a shekel should not just be a spiritual thing, but within the spiritual realm, it should be a fire. Why? So I've explained hachiluk ben eish l'shar hayisodos. What's the difference between fire and the other elements, afar, mayim, v'ruach, earth, water, and wind? Kipshutam lamata, shemizeh muvon shekenu gam b'shar shem haruchani. We're looking at the physical properties, but we understand from this that the differences in their physical properties is a reflection of their spiritual source. What's the difference? Sheshar hayisodos yordim mitivam lamata, or l'chol hayosin nisharim b'mkayimim. All the other elements naturally flow downward, or at the very least, they remain stationary. In contradistinction, the nature of fire is to go upward. Ad kidekach, so much so, shadlusha hishtadlus miyuchedes al yedei psila sha'esh tishar lamata. You need special intervention through a wick or something like a wick to tether the fire so that it remains below. Because of its own natural properties, it wants to go upwards. V'zehu shehera HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe matbeya shel eish. And this is what it means that Hashem showed Moshe a coin of fire. Shenesinas machetzes hashekel al yidei Yisrael hi loy rak nesina de matbeya ruchanis ella b'zeh gufa ba'ofen de eish. That when a yid gives the half shekel, it's not just that it becomes a spiritual coin, but it becomes a coin of fire. Sheyesh ba hatchuna de eish lies oila lamaila la lois bakoidesh iloi achar iloi. It has the characteristic of wanting to go higher, higher and higher in the spiritual sphere. And in the next paragraph, in so few words, the Rebbe kind of sums up the whole Indian here. And now we'll understand even better. Literally, it will become sweeter to understand how a physical, material coin can cause atonement for the soul. Because we're talking about a material, physical coin that has the properties of fire. And fire manifests this idea of wanting to ascend upward. Distancing oneself from the material realm and yearning for the spiritual. There you have it in those few words, 6 words. The whole thesis is so elegantly summed up.
Hello, Gina speaking.
Hi. Oh, I don't know if she's
Yes.
speaking. Okay. Yud. Umizeh yesh lilmoid hira nifla b'avodas adam. And from this,
Yeah, I mean, I would like to, but I can't.
in a few minutes, just when we finish this last part.
She needs to mute herself.
Oh, somebody muted her. Thank you, Tzippa. And from this, we learn, the Rebbe says, a wondrous lesson in our Avodah. אף על פי שהציווי דנשינס מחץ השקל יקרה בזמן שבית המקדש היה קיים, באש היה חיוב לעשות מחץ השקל לצורך קורבנות הציבור של כל השנה. Even though, you know, the actual mitzvah, the actual commandment to give machzah shekel was in the main in the times of Beis Hamikdash. They would collect these shkolim, and it would go towards the communal karbanos that were offered on behalf of all of the Jews twice a day, a whole year. Mikol Mokim, still in all, harigam bisman hazeh minhag Yisrael, but still in our day, it's a custom. Litin koidem Purim, Balel Purim kodesh mispalim mincha. On the eve of Purim, before Mincha, we give machatzis min hamatbeah kavua ba'isa mokim ba'isa zman. We give a half of the coin that is the established currency in that place at that time, and we do it zecher lemachatzis hashekel, to remember this mitzvah machatzis hashekel shahayu noisnim ba'adar, that used to be given in this month of Adar. And because it says the word truma offering 3 times in Parshas Truma, so it's the custom to give $3.50 or whatever currency of your country. And in addition, and because within each person there is a spiritual tabernacle, a spiritual mikdash, a spiritual temple, like it says, I will rest among you. And very famously, our commentaries explain, grammatically, the Torah should have said, I will rest within it. But it says, I will rest within you, within each one of you. Move on, it's understood that just like we have within us a Beis Hamikdash, so everything about the Beis Hamikdash also exists within our internal landscape, ecosystem, and so also including the idea of the Machatzis HaShekel. Shemimenu oisim es adnei hamishkan shel hamishkan haruchani shebeteicha. And one of the times that they gave Chatzi Shekel before the Mishkan was created, they gave it for the Adanim, they gave it for the silver sockets. So there is still this inyan of the Adanim for our silver sockets, of our metaphoric Mishkan. Al kachi ha'hira me'inyan zeh yitnu matbeya shel eish. So because of this, the hira, the lesson from this idea of this is what you should give, this, the Eibishter is showing and pointing to a fire, a coin of fire. Sheki Yisrael noisnim pruta lemitzvah litzdaka. When Jews give a coin to a mitzvah, let's say to tzedakah, v'chein kishem mefaisim es ha'ani b'dvarim b'dibor gashmi alidei hey moitza'is hapeh hagashmiyim. Or when you give tzedakah by appeasing a poor person, making them feel better through words, and you're saying physical words that come out of the 5 ways in which we articulate words, because there are 5 components of speech, and different letters are made with different aspects. Hari einzu matbeya gashmis oidipor gashmistam. We have to know that this is not just a pedestrian physical act or physical speech. Elagam matbeya shel eish, inin shel ruchnius kedusha. But we have to know that when we give money to a poor person, when we bolster a person by speaking to them in a way that gives them hope, this is a matbeya shel eish. This is a coin of fire. It's a spiritual, holy thing. Ubazeh gufa sheyesh b'hatchuna de'esh shetivo la'alois tamid l'mayla. And it's not just spiritual, but it's spiritual in the sense of fire, which is all about going higher and higher. Umimachatz hashekel lemeidim al kol hamitzvos. And from Machatz HaShekel we learn about all the mitzvahs. Shekol Pe'ula Shel Adam Mi Yisrael Binyani Torah Mitzvahs. that every action that a Jew does in Torah mitzvahs, afshin islapshu b'dvarim gashmiyim dafka, although it is embodied in materials, in physical materials specifically, tzitzis b'tzemer gashmi, tzitzis in wool, tefillin b'klaf gashmi, tefillin in parchment, ukiyotze b'zeh b'shar kol mitzvah, and so on and so forth in all the mitzvahs. Eina Pa'ula Gashmis Bilvad. We should be very cognizant of the fact that this is not just a physical, material action. Ela zui gam matbea shel eish, inyan shel ruchnius u'kedusha. It's spiritual. It's holy. Umizeh muvan goydel ha'ilui v'hanifla kasher avedasa shel Yehudi b'chol inyanei haTorah mitzvaseh nasis mitoch chayos. And this allows us to understand the enormity of what happens when a Jew does mitzvahs with vitality, with enthusiasm, choim v'eslavos, with warmth and with enthusiasm, eish shel kedusha, a fire of holiness, ad shebechol pa'ula shaloi nikeres hamatbeya shel eish. The Rebbe says when a Jew does a mitzvah, it's always a matbeya shel eish. It's always a fiery coin. But when a Jew does it with warmth, when they do it when they give it their all, when we really do it with passion, with heat, then it's recognizably matbeya shel eish. Va'ad shemekayim atzivoy, until we fulfill the commandment, eish tamid tukad al mizbeach lo yisichbeh. There was a commandment in the Beis Hamikdash that there should be an eternal fire on the altar and it should never be extinguished. And the Rebbe says that in our microcosmic mishkan, in our inside ourselves, the mizbeach is the heart. So when we do mitzvahs constantly with fire, with warmth, with enthusiasm, with passion, we come to a place where we can actually bring to fruition the commandment that there should be an eternal fire on the altar, on the heart. In other words, that we should constantly be in a state of fiery passion for Hashem. Amen. Keni Hiratzon. I wanted to just do footnote 64. So let's go back to the words in the Sikha. Umimachatz hashekel lemeitim al kol hamitzvahs. Rebbe says that we learn from machatz hashekel for all mitzvahs. And in footnote 64, he says, "Denaisav lezesha kol mitzvah kailelas kol mitzvahs." In addition to the fact that every mitzvah encompasses all mitzvahs. Again, the holographic approach of the Rebbe. And he says if you skip all of the places where this idea is explored, ubefrat al pi habir be'inyan ha'isik b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. Especially if you explore the idea that when you're busy with one mitzvah, then you're patur from another mitzvah. So the pedestrian way of understanding that is you're doing a mitzvah, so therefore you're excused. You're free of doing another mitzvah. But Chassidus explains, it's not like, oh, phew, I'm free. I've done my part, I don't have to do it. But rather, every mitzvah is comprised of every other mitzvah. But in addition to this, Hari Mikevon Shemimachas HaShekel Nasu Adonai HaMishkan. But because from this Machatz HaShekel were made the sockets, the basis of the Mishkan, as said above, Nimtza Shezehu HaYisoid. So this is the basis to Allah Banui HaMishkan Kulai, upon which is built the entire Mishkan. Klolus HaAvodah V'Shachanti B'Seicham Hanas is Aidekim Torah Mitzvahs. In other words, it's not just, the Rebbe wants to say, not only can we infer from this mitzvah for all other mitzvahs, and not only is this like every other mitzvah, that every mitzvah is comprised of every other mitzvah, but here it's something more specific and unique. And that is that this Machatz HaShekel went to make the Adonim. The Adonim are the basis upon which the whole Mishkan rests. And what is the spiritual avodah of building a Mishkan? It's Torah mitzvahs. So therefore, we learn from this fiery coin about every other mitzvah. Now, Chani, oh yeah, well, we could shut it.